Online for Authors. I'm chatting with Laury A Egan, author of Fair Haven. Welcome, Laury.
Hi there. How are you doing, Terry?
I am really good, and I'm so happy to have you. I loved the book, couldn't put it down, very into the characters. But before we really get into it, why don't you tell listeners what it is they can expect when they open up the cover of Fair Haven?
Well, even though this is technically a murder mystery, it's not the typical murder mystery. The murder happens in the first couple of lines on the prologue, and then we get into all the characters. And so in many ways, this reminds me a little more of a BBC or a British murder mystery, where they really dive into the characters and their relationships. So this is sort of Peyton Place, Fair Haven, and Fair Haven's a lovely town. It's very close nearby me. So I don't mean to say anything negative about the town, because it's a great town. But everybody is sort of involved in one way or the other with a woman that is murdered. And so some of them are sexual relationships, financial fraud, they're all various different kinds of connections, gay, straight, everything that she's involved with. And then so there's a fairly large cast, at least for me. And that was a challenge. And actually, this was my first book that I ever wrote. And I worked on it back 40 years ago, put it under the mattress because I just didn't think it was good enough. Then I proceeded to start publishing other things. But my current publisher, Andrew May in London, Spectrum Books and Enigma Books, he took 4 of my manuscripts and published them within 13 months. So I had a bare desk. And I said, well, let me look at this thing and see if it's as bad as I remember. Well, the plot was really good, but boy, the formatting and mistakes and plot errors, it was a nightmare to fix it. I went over, probably 35 times. I had a really good editor look at it, and then the publisher's editor looked at it. We kept finding snags. So this book is a little more complicated than my other titles, but I think it's very interesting. And, you don't have to live in New Jersey where this takes place to appreciate it, because this is a small town sort of concept.
It has kind of that small town, almost a cozy mystery feel with a little more oomph. You know what I'm saying? It has a little, we get a little more character interaction, and we see a little more of the grit, which I really enjoyed. But it isn't, we don't see a lot about the murder itself. We know it happens, and then it's pretty much over. And then we're now dealing with the whodunit part.
Exactly. And the trick was to make sure that quite a few of my characters could have done it.
Yes.
And keeping their schedule so that they could have been there.
Absolutely. And I was going to ask you how you kept that all straight, because you do have a plethora of characters. I mean, we've got even the woman who was murdered is a character, because we go back and we see like how she was with different people and how she interacted. So she comes to life. We've got her ex-husband. We've got ex-lovers. We've got people that she works with. We've got, and everyone is kind of all entangled, not just with her, but maybe her and one or two of the other characters in some way.
Right.
And I thought, oh my gosh, as an author, right? I'm looking at this going, oh, how did she keep it all straight?
Lots of notes. I had calendars. I had descriptions of all the characters and their backstories. And it was really a nightmare. But I don't think the reader will feel that way about it. Just from my point of view, it was tricky and really made me do a lot of swearing, I have to confess. But it's just sort of ironic that this first book that I wrote, and then I picked it up a couple of times over many years, and I kept putting it away. And then all of a sudden I was really desperate, and my publisher loved it. I mean, he was so excited. He's a lovely man. And I was just really lucky to have this on deck, because otherwise I don't know what I would have done.
Right. And that is interesting to me because I have a couple of manuscripts that I have shoved off to the side and said these were no good. They were early ones, first things that I wrote that I've got, and I tell people that they're buried in the deepest, darkest drawer and will never see the light of day. And then you say to me, hey, this is the first one I ever wrote. And I brought it out and I thought, maybe those will see the light of day someday.
Well, hopefully we get better as writers and we get more sophisticated and we know more stuff. And so when we go back to look at these really old manuscripts, we have a completely different perspective on, what's working, what isn't. And the plot was always working and the characters were always working. It was just, I made some really big goofs and I had a very nice young man who was had just left the Fairhaven police force. And he set me straight on a whole bunch of things, let me tell you, which required major reworking.
Yeah, like that would never happen, Laurie.
A prosecutor at Monmouth County who was retired, and he even added more things for me to fix. Right. So I was just like, oh my God, can I do this? But yeah, I pulled it off, I think. I hope.
No, you did pull it off. It was really good. There were plenty of suspects in my mind. Plenty of reasons for many people to have decided that this is how they were going to handle their life. And I kept going back and forth with a couple of characters with could they have or yeah, maybe. And so in the end, I was once again, the last one that I read of yours was The Psychologist Shadow.
Yeah, that was last
and I did not guess the whodunit on that one. And then I did not guess on this one either. So I may not be a good guesser. That may be part of the problem. But I get so involved with the characters that I can really see how all of them could have done it. And I'm unwilling to eliminate them. It's like, yeah, well, I'll just hold them in the not quite as likely, but still potential pile.
Well, you're not alone for The Psychologist Shadow. I think even two therapist friends of mine didn't get that one. And I teased them about that for quite a while. And then I think only one friend had sort of narrowed it down to the person who was responsible, but they weren't sure. And not many people have read Fairhaven yet because it's, it's about to come out.
Right.
But the few people that have didn't guess either. So don't feel bad.
but I think I actually like that. I don't like it when I'm reading a book and halfway through I already know. Mm-hmm. I like to be surprised. I like to maybe have some clues, but I'm not sure, and it's leading me places, and then something else happens, and then I'm now really unsure. I like that because that to me is why I'm reading a book that has that mystery thriller type component to it, is because I don't want to know.
Yeah, I agree. I just finished an Anne Holt book, one of the Scandi noir authors, who's very good, but I sort of guessed who it was. Yeah. I wasn't positive, and it took a long while for me to find out. Yeah, I was right, but I wasn't sure enough to make it really ruin the effect of reading.
Right. But there's still that
right on the edge.
Yeah. I like it. And then you have a nice little twist at the end, which I'm not going to give away, but I just liked that. I really enjoyed it. I'm curious, what made you pick a real town, Fairhaven?
I love the irony. Yeah. Fairhaven.
Yes,
I mean, it's turned into a hotbed of intrigue instead,
Right.
I just thought it was funny. I mean, or just wry. And, there are plenty of other, I could have made up a name or anything, but how could you improve on Fairhaven for her?
I love that. I'm curious. You mentioned, in the story, you've got restaurants and places, and are those real or are those imaginative?
Some aren't.
Okay.
Yeah, it's sort of a mixed bag, or I've renamed someplace that, is in town. But, anybody that lives in the area or in Monmouth County will probably recognize where I'm going in some cases, not all.
Okay.
I have the cover here, and one of my photography students did a drone shot So this is the one of the two rivers. The other's on the other side of the town. And, this sort of very bucolic, a lot of, little docks hanging out. And, they're very much, it's a river town. It's very old. I mean, the Lenape Indians were there, over 1,000 years ago. And, so it's an interesting town. Yeah.
So I know that you are a prolific writer. I've only read 2 of yours so far. I'm curious what draws you to this mystery, thriller, suspense type genre. And then also, do you write other things?
I do write other things. In fact, that's part of why I sometimes had difficulty, because I am in several different genres. I originally started, obviously, with this book. And this isn't quite psychological suspense. This is more of a standard murder mystery, I think.
Right.
But I have written psychological suspense, and that was really one of my strong attractions. And it was the first book I published, Jenny Kidd, which is going to be, I just revised it, and it's going to be reprinted by my London publisher in October.
Oh, fantastic.
But I loved Patricia Highsmith's work initially, and that sort of got me hooked. Her Tom Ripley series, and I read everything of hers. I don't know that she would have been such a pleasant person to meet from what I have read about her, but her books really opened the door to the psychological suspense as a genre. And so a number of my books fall into that category, A Psychologist's Shadow.
Yeah.
I mean, that was one, but there are quite a few others. But then I write, literary work as well. I've had about 90. I'm also, I've written 4 volumes of poetry, and I have about 90 poems and stories published. And then this is coming out in May. This is the next collection, Contrary, and it has a play in it, which I haven't published a play before. So that's going to be fun.
Yeah. So what I like about that is, because I don't like being stuck in a genre. I kind of write what's in my head. And sometimes it fits a genre. I tend to lean more towards a historical fiction, very character-driven historical fiction. But I'm currently writing a contemporary humor piece. I've got a children's story that I hope will come out later this year. I have ideas, and sometimes they really fit where I started, and sometimes they don't. And I don't like being stuck in a spot. I do like the opportunity to write what's in my head.
Exactly. I tend to write what comes to me. And, luckily, this new publisher of mine, he seems to be very happy with whatever I come up with. I mean, it's very hard to get a short story collection published.
Absolutely.
I was lucky with the first one, but I had a theme that fit the Humanist Press in Washington, D.C., and so they took it. It was one of the, few fiction books they ever published. And they also did an early novel of mine, The Outcast Oracle. But, I'm really fortunate to have a publisher like this that's willing to sort of swim with me as I sort of jump all over the place. Because in between A Psychologist's Shadow, after that was 2 novellas that are literary. Very interesting, very strange. They're partially linked, and that's The Black Leopard's Kiss and The Writer Remembers. Yeah. So that is very literary. And then the next one was Jack and I, which is about a boy with dissociative identity disorder. So that's sort of psychological suspense. So
they're around. No, but I
Fairhaven.
Yeah, and I love that. So going back to Fairhaven, you've got a huge cast of characters.
Yes.
And I'm curious, do you have a favorite? Is there one character in particular that was either your favorite to just because you like them most, or to write, or to, figure out their motivations? Is there a character that really stuck with you?
Well, because I share some similarities of interests, not looks, but interests, with Chris Clark, who is a photographer, which I was and still teach photography. and she was a sailor, which I sailed when I was in high school and stuff on that same river that she is on. And so I think I have some connection with her. Mm-hmm. But I also really loved the police chief of Fairhaven, Ray Mackey.
Yes, so did I.
He came across clear as a bell to me. I knew who he was. I knew, how he'd get in and out of a car, and then the car would be full of junk, that he just tossed in the back.
No.
And,
not to give anything away, but he has a date at one point, and she goes to get in the car, and he's like throwing things into the back seat, and it just made me laugh because I could see him. Your description of him was so perfect that I could see him as a little too heavy, his clothes a little too tight, a little sweaty, just
yeah. Well, he actually has a sort of a semi-comic. He's serious because he is a police chief,
yes.
But at one point, because he is dating this woman who works for him at
right.
the station, who's also a little bit overweight, and I can't remember if she's a widow or divorced, but anyway, he goes to a big man's shop to try to get some new clothes because he hasn't bought anything for a long time. And there's this tall, huge, like basketball player kind of guy. And he's wondering, why don't they ever have anybody that looks like me, behind the counter?
Right. Why can't we just have a big store instead of big and tall, right?
He's got a few little interesting moments. And then there's a beagle in it. I had a beagle too, which is another reason the Chris Clark character and I bonded right away. And I used my dog's name, Cagney. And Cagney is just a typical obstreperous, pain in the neck, stubborn, smart dog.
Yes.
And so he sort of adds a little bit of humor.
Yes, and a little bit kind of gets rid of some tension sometimes too.
Mm-hmm.
Something happens and then, Cagney's going nuts and you just kind of,
Yeah. So I really loved having him make an appearance. And
Right. I can't remember. I think I probably asked you this before, but I don't remember the answer. Do you write everything out and have a plan before you get started, or do you pants and just kind of write and see where it takes you?
Depends on the book. Sometimes I have where the goalpost is, but I don't know how to get there. I just gonna have to follow and eventually find my way there.
Right.
Other times I do not have a clue in the world. I mean, for Fairhaven, I knew. I knew who the culprit was, and but I didn't know all the complicated plot. Who was what. That really, I had to just sit down and just work through that. Every book is a little different, and I'm not one of these people that does a huge amount of pre-designing of the plot, but I do my research. I do quite a bit of research. So
I think that's what I do. A lot of people are surprised that I don't do more, plotting, more outlining, and it doesn't work for me. I've tried several different methods that I just don't feel comfortable with it, but I do a lot of research. And as I'm researching, I'm getting ideas. Things are popping and I'll think, ooh, I could do that. And ooh, this would make that happen. And then when I sit down to write, I have all that information and it just seems to fall out of me into a story. But I can get very far into something before I know how I'm going to wrap it up.
I know. I think part of the joy of writing is finding out things about your characters. You're meeting them like new people in your life.
Right.
And so, they may change as you get to know them better. And so, that's going to affect the bottom line at the end. And, but I think that's part of the pleasure is sort of this organic period where you're writing your first draft. And, I think that's part of the joy of doing this kind of work.
I tell people that I do reverse plotting. And by that, I mean, I write my first draft and then I go back and I say, okay, so this thing is a mess and the plot is all over the place. And what do I need to do to fix it? But now that my characters have spoken to me and we have the story out, now it's easier for my brain to wrap around it and say, okay, well, this needs to come first. That can't be where that is. And in order for this to happen, I have to make sure this does something over here first. And it just it's like looking at a puzzle with several pieces missing, and you say, well, obviously the green one's going to go in this section, right? And it just, so I reverse plot. I just wait until I get my story out, and then I go back and just fix things.
Yeah.
So that's just my method of handling
you know,
it.
there are many writers who are very programmed, who, you know, have a big whiteboard behind them, and they plot every little detail out. And I do some, but I don't do as much. I mean, for Fairhaven, when I had to go back in and fix this old manuscript,
right.
I mean, I don't know how many pages of calendars. In fact, I gave one of my friends who did editing for me on this, and my publisher's editor, I said, here's the info here, so you can keep track of what's going on.
Right.
And who is where.
Who was where and when they were there. Yeah.
When they were there, why they were there, etc. So I did do that this time. I don't normally, but
you had so many characters.
Yeah.
You know, as I was trying to list them, I just said, oh, and don't forget, and oh, don't forget. And it was just like character after character would come in, and some were very minor and some were very major, and some were like supporting roles. And yeah, there was just a lot going on.
Yeah.
That kept you guessing, you know, as to like, well, what's happening here. So I really enjoyed that. So you talked just a little bit about the one that's coming out, Contrary, and it's got 21 stories?
21 stories. Most of them have been published in literary journals already. And then about a little less than half of the book is a play, a 2-act play. The first one I've ever published. It's a very intimate sort of stage drama. I mean, I have descriptions of the setting and everything, but it's about a woman who is a photographer. Excuse me, I'm doing that again, but
that's good though.
She was involved in a plane crash while she was photographing near St. Croix in the Caribbean, and so she we don't know whether it's temporary permanent loss of one eye and a broken hand. So as a result, she's dealing with disability, which will at least temporarily impact her livelihood, but also could be permanent. And she doesn't know. So she's got a therapist who comes in to see her. And so it's really about these two women working through the therapy part of this. And the therapist actually also has some vulnerable moments and participates a lot, you know, so it's not sort of your typical therapeutic transaction.
Right.
So it's really about the two women. There are a couple of little side characters, but they're just really fleeting, and they're just more for a little backstory. But I had a lot of fun with this one. I wrote that one also a fairly long time ago, and I was too nervous to publish it because it was a little bit close to home on a few spots, and I thought, I don't know that I'm a reserved person. I don't know that I want to go there.
Right.
But then
how much of me do I want out in the world? Right?
Three people who are prickly like I am read it and said, yeah, thumbs up, publish it. So. I added it in. I was just originally going to do the stories, but they range from very short, like flash fiction, all the way to longer pieces. And they, again, range in genre from very literary to psychological suspense, romance, comedy. It's all over the place. There's no real interconnection, except there's a sort of contrary quality to a lot of the stories. And so I had fun with it. It was really
so this is kind of like, if you want to know what Laurie's thinking in general, you can just read this, and by the end of it, we know you a lot better.
I think you probably will know me a little better than I'm comfortable with, frankly, particularly the play. But there are a couple of other things that are right on sort of autobiographical, like the theme story, Contrary, is about a girl who doesn't, her mother's very glamorous and wants her to get dressed for an outing, a party that her mother's holding, cocktail party. And this would have been in the late 50s, early 60s. and she doesn't want to wear the shoes. Her feet don't fit in those pointed shoes.
Yeah, yeah.
And she tries to argue, and she can't get anywhere. So she winds up putting the shoes on the wrong foot and walking out to the party just to make a point. So again, I didn't do that, but I couldn't wear the shoes. So I borrowed a little bit from my own childhood memories for that one. But there's another beagle in here. Two gay guys have a beagle who's very musical, as mine was. I mean, he had perfect pitch. And so that's sort of a little bit comedic.
Right.
But it's also a story about the two guys and their relationship. Yeah.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, I love that idea. Are you working on, I don't know why I'm asking you if you're working on anything, given everything that's going on in your world right now and the fact you've got 2 books coming out, but I'm curious, are you writing anything right now? Are you working on anything?
First time in years. I had these 2 to go through, so I had to do all the promotion, which, that goes, trying to find reviewers and bloggers and people that will help me out with that. That was, that's a big job. So I've been sort of tied up with that, and then, editing proof and that kind of stuff. And I just finished, as I said, revising my first book, Jenny Kidd, which is set in Venice. And I keep thinking would make a great film. So that's the next thing I got to start investigating, because it's a little like Saltburn, which was a 2023 film that was very strange. But this one's more exotic, maybe a little more erotic too, because it's set in Venice and it's, in a palazzo. So it's a good book. And I was originally approached when the book came out by a really important Hollywood director, but in those days, this was been a little bit over the top for, I think, most mainstream filmmakers. Now it would be like nothing.
I was going to say that things have changed dramatically in what you can see on a television in your own home in the middle of the afternoon now versus like me growing up as a kid.
Yeah, it's completely different. So I may look into that. But other than that, no, I have a couple of ideas. One idea for a short story, but I can't figure out the arc. I know what the sort of the punchline is, but I can't figure out how to work it out. Because when I was in the hospital recently, everybody always says, "Have a good day," or "Are you having a good day?" And I say, "Well, I'm in the hospital. How am I going to have a good day?"
Yeah, let's be honest.
The drivers, the nurses, the aides, the doctor, everybody said that over and over and over again. And I was like, how stupid this is. I mean, don't they realize how annoying that is? So I was thinking about that as a story, but I haven't figured it out yet.
Haven't figured out how to do it yet. Well, it could definitely have some good humor to it. And have some of your contrariness to it as well.
Yeah, and there are a couple of stories that would really fit with this. But this is really an eclectic combination of stories. So I think it'll be fun.
Well, it is on my TBR pile. It's just that my pile has gotten really huge, and I wanted very quickly to fit one of the 2 in. And I thought, well, I'm going to put Fairhaven in first and read it, because that will be fun to talk about here. And then I've got the other one in my pile, so I will read it and get that reviewed. And I know I'll enjoy it, because I haven't read anything of yours yet that I have not enjoyed. It's always been it's been fun, and I really like that.
Well, you've got Fairhaven is my 15th published novel, all traditionally published, and Contrary is my 2nd collection. So
I mean, I've got lots that I could just read Laury Egan all of 2025 and not have to do anything else, right?
Yeah, that's it. I'm keeping my friends busy.
Absolutely. Well, Laury, is there anything else that you would like to talk about that I didn't bring up?
No, these 2 books are really different from each other, although some of the stories may have a little bit of I don't think there's any murder mysteries in there, but there's one very dark little flash fiction piece that hasn't been published, probably because it's just a little too dark. But I thought that's what flash fiction was supposed to be anyway. So, they're 2 completely different books, and but I think it really shows the range of what I do, and
Absolutely.
the collection in particular does. I mean, there are a couple of very funny. I have a friend that's very, very funny, and he sort of told me the plot for Left Behind, which is set on a ship, and I think that'll make anybody giggle. I think they'll laugh at it, and it's a good break from some of the more serious.
Things, yeah. So about your note about flash fiction, my flash fiction is, whenever I write it, it's either very funny or it's dark. And I'll send them to my daughter, and it'll maybe be a dark one, and she'll go, "Ooh, Mom, where did that come from?" And it's like, I'm not sure, but I said writing flash fiction is absolutely cheaper than a therapist. So, just.
Yeah. Well, it's sort of like eating peanuts. It's really quick, Yes. I mean, it doesn't make you crazy.
Right. I think something about flash fiction, the reason that dark or humor really work for it is because in flash, you don't have a lot of words. You have to, it's shorter than a short story. And depending on the flash, I do some micro flash where it's 50 words or less, and so you have to be able to have a twist, a punch, a something that happens. And dark and comedy can both come out of nowhere.
That's exactly right. And, comedy, it could be the last line that really hits.
Exactly. Like everything was going along one way and bam,
So I can understand why you're sort of falling into those two different categories.
Yeah. And I think because most of the time, I noticed recently, my husband passed, and so I'm doing the whole grieving thing. I think grief might also fit into a flash, if you know what I'm saying, because it can come kind of out of nowhere where you can pull it in. But I haven't been able to master that yet, and I think it's because I'm still so much in the midst of it that it
takes a while.
I can't go there yet. But I've been trying to think of what are other ways to do the twist at the end. Because in my opinion, or at least for me, the way I write flash, I have a twist. I always have something. You think you're going down a path, and then all of a sudden I've jerked you off into someplace else. And then when you look back, you realize you were on the path the whole time. I just didn't let you know it. And that's how I like to do it. And so I keep trying to investigate other ways. Okay, so I've got comedy and I've got dark. What else can I do that can twist at the end? And so,
I think, one that you might want to read in contrary is Reaching for the Moon, which I wrote quite a while ago, actually, but it was precognitive in some ways, which I tend to be anyway. But, that's about a woman who's dying, and she's in the hospice bed, and she's looking out to sea, and she can't eat anymore, and she's doped up to the gills. So but there's a sweetness, and there's a sort of hopefulness, oddly enough, not religious, because I'm not religious, but that sort of it's got a little grief in there because she's obviously not going to be with us much longer. And but I think it's a very interesting feeling of, well, what's going to happen next?
What is the next?
Yeah, so you might want to have a look at that one. That's one of the ending ones. And then I think that just got picked up for publication, so that's really nice.
Oh, fun. Wonderful. Yeah. So, Laury, if someone wanted to reach out to you and talk to you about your many and various writings, how do they do that?
Well, I have a website, and it's www.lauryaegan.com. And there's a contact there. And I'm also on Facebook and Instagram, Blue Sky, LinkedIn, and Twitter. So, anybody can find me. Just make sure that you put in my middle initial, because believe it or not, there is another Laury Egan out there.
Well, there's another Terry Brown with Terry spelled my way.
Terry Brown's a little more of a obvious name. Laury, I thought, nobody. My mother was a painter, so she thought it wrote better with my last name. So that's why I got that.
There you go. Well, wonderful. Well, guys, I will have all of those links in the show notes, so you'll be able to find Laury. And Laury, thank you so much for being with me today and giving me the opportunity to read Fairhaven.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Terry. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you for listening to Online for Authors, where I, Terry M. Brown, author of character-driven fiction and host of the podcast, introduce readers to characters they'd love to invite to lunch. Tune in next Tuesday for another podcast episode.